A question got posted at the general comments on the YouTube site about whether some people have addictive personalities, and that makes it really difficult for them to stop smoking because they're addicted. I pointed out in the response on the board about this is really a moot point, whether because a person has an addictive personality are they going to have a harder time quitting. It's the same question: is it an excuse that you can't quit smoking because you have an addiction? Because if that were true, if people couldn't quit smoking because they were addicted to cigarettes, nobody would ever quit smoking. Nobody could ever quit smoking. Well, I guess I shouldn't say nobody, that's an exaggeration. But probably 90% of people who smoke would never be able to quit smoking. Keep in mind, we have more former smokers alive in the United States today than current smokers. Over half the people who used to smoke cigarettes have quit smoking. This wipes out any idea or any conjecture that it is impossible to quit smoking. Keep in mind, the vast majority of these former smokers were addicted to nicotine. Did some of them have addictive personalities by nature? Sure. Did some of them have genetic predispositions to addiction? Sure. And that seems like it has more importance about other drug addictions because, take an addiction like alcohol. General consensus has always been it's like, 10% of people who drink alcohol will become addicted to it. And again, is it because of a personality? Is it because of a genetic issue? There's debate on both sides of these arguments of what the cause is. But the reality still is the majority of people who drink don't go on to use it to addictive levels. That's not saying that alcohol is not an addictive drug. It's a very addictive drug. The people who have the addiction, it is real, and it is a dangerous addiction. It is a powerful addiction. It just doesn't addict everyone who uses it, and in reality, it addicts a minority of the people who use the substance. It's a significant minority, again, 10%, and I've even seen studies or people say it's as high as 20%, and I don't know, I'm not sure where the number falls in, but it's still safe to say that the majority of people who use it don't go on to addicted type of usage. With smoking, it's a similar situation. Similar in meaning that not everybody who uses it gets hooked. Similar with one big difference. The numbers are inverted. Where they say, 10% of people who use alcohol will go on to become addicted, with smoking, it's 9 out of 10 people who use it generally go on to be addicted. Most surveys done throughout the history of smoking, people ask whether they want to quit or not. The majority, and it was usually over 80% of the people, say they wish they didn't smoke. That was a pretty good sign. It's not the only sign, but it's a pretty good sign that those people who were using it were addicted to it. The same thing goes on to early usage. Studies done on high school students who smoke. They're smoking already. And then they were asked, how many of you think you're going to be smoking 5 years from now? Well, 5% of kids who smoke already were working with the assumption that they'd be smoking 5 years later. They said they weren't going to. 95% of them said they weren't going to. When those same students were followed up 6 to 9 years, 75% of them were smoking. Again, showing that where the original intent of these students was not to become long-term users. For every one who thought they were going to become a long-term user, 15 of them did. It addicted the majority. So here is where the issue comes in. The vast majority of people who smoke are addicted to it. If you're now going to say, I can't quit smoking because I'm addicted to it, you pretty much sentenced yourself to smoking till death. And you did it on a false presumption that because you're addicted, that means you can't stop. No, because you're addicted doesn't mean you can't stop. It just means you have to treat it as an addiction to quit smoking. See, you treat an addiction like an addiction, you will be able to take control over it. You treat an addiction like a bad habit, you don't have a prayer. You're not going to succeed. The way people try to treat bad habits, again, they try to cut down on their bad habits. They try to gain control of it, like they're going to do it in a way that's acceptable, that's safe, that's tolerable. It's not going to cause them all the problems. It's because they're working with the basis that if they just make up their mind, they can control quantity or they can control duration. We're dealing with addiction. You cannot control quantity or duration, not comfortably. Yes, can a person cut themselves way back to a real small amount of cigarettes? Yeah, there's people who are forced to do that now because they can't smoke in so many different environments. They're not allowed to smoke in their home. They're not allowed to smoke in their office. They can't smoke when they're out with certain friends. And they find themselves having to really smoke lower and lower amounts than they did in the past. But how they're doing it is, again, they're in chronic withdrawal. They're chronically feeling lousy because they're not getting the full complement that they need. They're living in constant withdrawal, getting used to it. They're used to feeling lousy is what it comes down to. It's amazing when some of these people quit who are controlled smokers. Again, they're truly controlled by their smoking, but they're calling themselves controlled smokers. They often become the most comfortable the quickest because they've been so miserable for years, just never smoking the right way for them, the right amount to be comfortable. They often find that they can feel really good really fast if they just get this stuff out of their system. But that's what it comes down to, understanding the addiction. Understand what you are fighting. When you're quitting smoking, you are detoxifying. You're getting nicotine out of your system. If you get the nicotine out, withdrawal will peak within 1 or 2 or 3 days. It's going to peak sometime in that time period. After that, it'll get easier and easier, and then after a couple of weeks, you're not having physical symptoms. You're not having physical withdrawal. You have emotional issues every now and then and trigger circumstances, but generally these are things that you'll be able to control. You'll be able to squelch. The way you squelch it is you reinforce your resolve. You remember why you're quitting smoking. You force yourself to see cigarettes how they were at the end. They were so annoying at the end, you put yourself through withdrawal to get off of them. It's a matter of seeing them for what they were. They were, again, an active drug addiction that you had to feed. And the way you fed it was by constantly administering the drug, one way or another, whether it been by a cigarette, by a cigar, by a pipe, by chewing tobacco, by a patch, by gum, by e-cigarettes. I mean, there's so many different ways you can pour nicotine in your bloodstream now. Again, I always joked about this with people in programs, who said, they wanted something. They didn't want to smoke, but they had to do something. And I always pointed out, yeah, you know what? If you take this drug, if you take nicotine, if you can put it into a needle and you inject it in your arm, lo and behold, you won't need to smoke anymore. You'll see that as a great feat until you look at the visualization that we just portrayed. That is an ugly picture of what's going on, but it's an accurate portrayal. They were feeding a drug addiction. You are fighting addiction. Treat it as an addiction. The way you treat it as addiction is you stop taking it. You let the drug get out of your system. And then the way you stay off smoking, even though you were an addict, and the fact is you are still an addict. You're an addict that doesn't have symptoms and aren't going to have problems from the addiction, but you still have the addiction. But the way to avoid any problems with that addiction, any health consequence, any social consequence, any expenses to it, just a way to avoid all the problems that you have because you had this history of an addiction to nicotine. The way to avoid it all, once you quit, is to simply stick to the commitment that you hopefully made the day you stopped, to never take another puff.